Welcome, Nick, to Deconstruction Zone.
I
And
appreciate you having me. Thank you.
I'm so glad we're actually able to sit down and do this interview because I feel like I've been consuming your content for a while,
Likewise.
and
No,
I
seriously.
I have so much so much to learn about you as a person and about your journey. So we're definitely gonna dig into your journey today. Nick goes by the handle of the Chicago Atheist on TikTok. Do you have any other social media we should be aware of?
I, I do, but they're for my business accounts.
Okay.
I run a side ATM business,
Mhm.
after I do my global security command center type stuff. So that's
Right.
that's my that's my 5 to 9. So all my ATM installations,
Mhm.
posts about that's what I use my social media for. TikTok is specifically for my I guess atheist platform, if you will.
It's probably the best platform for that type of short content.
Yeah.
Um, I've noticed on YouTube it's very difficult to get traction with short form content in that space, at least.
No, sure thing. Yeah, absolutely.
So, without further ado, I've got some questions. I'm going to start out early because I know, like myself, at one point you were a believer. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah. No, I was brought up Catholic. I guess you could say Ukrainian Catholic,
Mm-hmm.
which, from what I understand, follows a lot of similarities of Roman Catholicism practices and beliefs. And I mean, grade school, high school, college were all Catholic institutions. But I guess I guess you would call it deconstruction or questioning, started in grade school.
Right.
Yeah, because my baby sister was born, and like I went to school the next day, and I was excited, and I don't know if she's still alive, but if she sees this, forgive me, Sister Judith. I was like, Sister Judith, my baby sister Larissa was born. Like she's the perfect little angel, and she tells me make sure she gets baptized
Oh
because if she
no.
doesn't and something were to happen, she's going to limbo and then to hell.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm like 10 years old. I'm like, my
That's
my
heavy.
my perfect little sister. Like, up until this time, I was of course taught the atrocities of what hell is. So I'm like, what did my 1 day old baby sister do to deserve that? And I was asking these questions to Sister Judith, and I was pretty much told, don't question God's work. So I was like, well, why the f can't I?
Right.
So I started, I think, very young.
That's really interesting. So you and I might have had similar upbringings. I grew up in the Catholic school system until I graduated and went off to college.
Okay.
But I went to a Catholic school that was okay with having questions.
Okay.
And so I didn't feel pressured to accept it or leave, if that makes sense.
Oh, all right. Okay.
Did you have when you came into what we would call like your teenage years or your age of accountability, did you have any moments where you felt to yourself, I think I do believe this, and I think maybe this is a path I should venture down?
As far as believing in a
Right.
sort of God, yeah, uh, between us or whoever's watching, I don't mind if anybody sees this. I've gone through tough periods in my life, and I'll even call it moments of deep depression.
Hmm.
I served
Hmm.
in the military for 11 years. I, went through some tough times,
War is
and
hell.
yeah, you know, um, my first month in Afghanistan, we had a funeral for one of our special forces individuals who was killed during a mission. And I was like, this holy shit. You have a plan. Everybody has a plan until the bullets start flying, right?
Right.
It's almost like what Mike Tyson said. Everybody's a plan until they get punched in the face.
Yes.
And I was going through some stuff. I tried, meditation. I tried journaling. Still was going through my thing. So I was like, F it. I'll just try prayer.
Right.
And it had the same results of doing nothing, if you will.
Okay. Yeah.
So, you know, um, my dad passed away last year, and a lot of people have, asked me, you're an atheist, wouldn't it be more comforting if you were to believe that, as a Catholic, your dad was a Catholic, you would see him again in an afterlife? And I was like, you know what? If you asked me that 10 years ago, I might give it a shot. But I've had so much little evidence to really follow that or believe that. And people are shocked when I tell them, you know what? When that casket closed on my pops, that was the last time I feel like I'm ever going to see him. People are like, well, that's a morbid way of looking at things. I'm like, uh, perhaps it is, but I don't want to try to fool myself into trying to believe in something that I intellectually don't want to substitute my intelligence for, and making an excuse for believing
Mhm.
in something that has just zero evidence for me to even begin to follow.
Right. Yeah. So as you were deconstructing, I know when you were younger, it sounds like you're in part of a system that didn't encourage questioning. As you got older and you probably had questions, did you find that there were places that would support your questioning and places that you felt like you could come to someone and say, "Hey, something these things kind of aren't adding up. Can you make it make sense?"
There was one place, and it's still something I reflect back on, as far as that one place in college in 2008, if I'm aging myself here. um, it was Dr. George Miller's metaphysics and epistemology class.
Yep.
And the more questions you asked, the better your grades got. So he encouraged us to question our beliefs. And if somebody said they believed in God, and you're like, this is why I don't, if you gave your reasons why you didn't, that's a fantastic way to boost your grade. It's not, he graded us based on our way of thinking versus us just saying, well, that's what I was brought up to believe. So that deconstruction really was emphasized in college. So still, I mean, to this day, that was the only real place I was able to truly question my beliefs, because uh, my, my brother, he's a born again Christian.
Hmm.
My sister's a Christian. My mom's a Catholic, and I've asked her why. It's because that's how she was brought up. My son's mom's a Christian. My son's grandparents are Christian.
Hmm.
So I really don't have an outlet other than TikTok or
Right.
anywhere else to really, express my lack of belief, because, yeah, I'm surrounded by the belief system. So, yeah. So my outlet, to answer your question, was 2008 in Dr. George Miller's metaphysics and epistemology class.
That's great. I think there's a common phrase, there's a time and place for everything, and it's called college.
Yeah. Some people don't drink themselves silly. I question God.
Did you find that being surrounded by people who are believers, even though it sounds like there was a little bit of a diversity in the types of believers, did you find that as being something that sort of pushed you towards believing, or did your background not have a factor in your belief?
And my belief. uh,
So I guess what I'm asking is,
yeah.
when I was a Christian, I personally found it helpful that I knew other people that I trusted that were also Christians.
Okay.
And so I kind of felt like, well, hey, these people probably have good reasons to believe. Maybe maybe I should as well. Maybe I'm the
Sure.
guy that's having the wrong questions. Maybe they've already answered the questions, right?
Yeah. No. Sure thing. Um, so going back to college, I'm not sure if you're familiar with like Illinois colleges, but I went to Lewis University and did their ROTC program, and we were connected to Wheaton College.
Yeah, I know Wheaton.
Okay, yes. So we were
Mhm.
connected to Wheaton College. So I guess us Lewis University redheaded stepchildren bastards. Uh, when I was talking to the Wheaton cadets, I would do like training competitions, and there was one time where we did a 19-mile timed ruck march, and I was beside like a devout Christian, and all we did was talk for the 5-hour 19-mile ruck march. And, I guess this gentleman, he was so profound in his willingness to listen to me. I was like, oh shit, maybe there was a slight moment where I was like, oh man, maybe being a Christian would make me, I guess, kind of be a better person, because
Mm.
the way I was asking the questions, I was kind of being an ass. Like,
Right.
I'm not, I was 19, right?
Hmm.
Or whatever age I was in
Right.
2008. But he was accepting all my criticism, and I was like, oh wow, like this guy's a devout Christian. He is like taking all my blows and answering my questions very profoundly. I was like, well, maybe there is some sort of inherent goodness
Yeah.
to being a Christian.
Yeah. I feel that as well, actually. When I decided to become a Christian, if you could technically do such a thing,
Yeah.
I personally found it very convincing that I felt like my life was kind of a mess as a teenager, but I felt like the people I knew that had it together and the people that were kind to me, they happened to be Christians. And
Yeah.
so for me, that was a convincing thing to say, like, hey, listen, my life looks like this and your life looks like that. Maybe I need to check this out.
Sure. Oh
Um,
yeah. Oh yeah.
and that
Been
works until you read the Bible, I suspect.
there. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Maybe the last question about while you're still kind of on the inside deconstructing. Um, at some point, did you ever, while you were kind of we'll say still in the belief system, did you ever have like, any fear associated with hell? Did hell play a factor at all in your decision making?
No, it wasn't the fear. I mean, I had that fear of hell. Uh, how, how PG? I guess I'll keep it PG. But how PG is this recording, if you
Oh no,
will?
this we can make this as adult as you need. Don't worry.
Okay, I won't get
I
too
mark
too
all my
nuts with it.
videos
But
not for children.
okay, all right. I remember I was like 13 or 14, and it was Easter Sunday.
Hmm.
You know, yeah, I'm in puberty, right?
Oh yeah,
And I was at the grocery store, and I saw a very attractive woman, and I had those thoughts as someone at
sure.
that age. And I was like, no, 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 no. On Easter Sunday, like this is when Jesus is like on top of me, and he knows my thoughts. So I was like, this is a surefire way to hell. But
That sounds
but
like the mind of a teenager. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, but on Easter Sunday, I was like, this, I'm screwed. However, the fear of hell didn't necessarily make me lose my faith, or not look into atheism, but question my belief system. I guess for the longest time knew hell was there, but based on what I was taught by my religious superiors, there was no way out of it. There was no way out of it. I could repent all I wanted. I was still a sinner in some way, shape, or form. So I guess at some point I turned that fear of hell into just, I could do all I can, but it looks like I'm going either way.
You took the full brunt of the Catholic guilt and said, "Well, if I'm going, I'm going."
I'm going full force, baby. you know, I'm riding shotgun. All right.
Ooh. So, did you have any, we'll say, formational experiences with atheists as you began to deconstruct your journey, and were, if so, were those experiences helpful?
Not no, no, not necessarily. I'm 36. There we go. My first real just ability to talk to, if you will, full blown atheists came when I made my The Chicago Atheist TikTok platform 4 months ago.
Hmm.
I've talked to people who've questioned their beliefs, but ultimately, when we've discussed our questioning beliefs, I've questioned it too. That's why I'm an atheist. Uh, uh, the majority, if not 100% of the personnel I've talked to, is like, well, I've questioned my beliefs, but I think that's God challenging me, yada, yada, yada type thing. So I've never really discussed anything with a full blown atheist, doesn't believe in a God until I've started my the Chicago Atheist platform. And okay, so I was 35 at the time. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Until you joined the devil's social media, and
absolutely.
look at you now.
Yep.
Were there any difficulties of letting certain things go? Like, was there any part of the faith that you didn't want to let go of?
Yeah. Yeah. Um, uh, Even just last year, like I mentioned, my dad passed, and as the atheist and a non-believer in the afterlife, I absolutely came to terms with, when I saw my father's body in that casket, that was the last time for all eternity that I was going to see him. And I was surrounded by people, telling me that, oh, that's a terrible way of thinking about it. It's like, wouldn't you want to think about the idea of reconnecting with him in heaven? So I was like, as much as that would be a lovely thought and warm and fuzzy feeling, uh, intellectually, I can't get there.
Right.
So but my family members who are believers were like, oh well, we believe that we're going to see him again. That's why we're able to cope with this a little bit easier, if you will.
Yes.
So I, you know, the grief process is difficult.
It
So
is
there
a
was a
it's a grief process for sure, because you're
yeah,
losing a vital part of your existence.
yeah. So I was like, maybe what if I entertained the thought of maybe seeing him again? But then I get back to I was like, Nick, really? Like, think about it. So, and to this day, honestly, um, I honestly wish that I had that belief system as far as it,
Mm.
um,
Hmm.
as far as it relates to my father. So it's, at some points, I wish I had that belief that I'm going to see him again in the
Right.
afterlife. Um, but other than that, I can't come to terms with the idea of the heaven and the afterlife and whatnot. So yeah, I wish I was able to do that, but the atheist in me, I guess, needs to come to terms with that. Last time I saw him, that was it.
Right. Yeah. And he hasn't come back. He hasn't contacted you from the dead. There's no reason to
Yeah.
believe that he's anywhere but in the ground.
If I could, so short story with that. So when we were talking to the funeral director, we were talking about either burying him or putting him in a mausoleum. And the funeral director was like, "Oh, you need to put him in the mausoleum, and it's going to be this much more, but he's facing west or east or whatever, which means when the second coming comes, he's going to be facing the way to get to heaven." I'm like, and my mom, she was like, "Oh, that sounds wonderful." I'm like, "Don't BS us into this to spend a little bit more money because he's going to be facing Mecca or whatever it is." I saw his casket get taped up. He's not getting out of that wall.
In your process, so I think one of the more difficult parts about um we'll say deconstructing and eventually landing at the spot where you just don't believe anything anymore, that you used to believe, is what to do with your friends and family around you. Because for some people, they're not willing to accept it. And they might say things like, oh, you don't actually, no longer believe, you're just suppressing it, or you just don't want to be held accountable. Did you have any negative reactions to your deconstruction process?
Oh, yes. Um, and more specifically, I don't think my brother follows me on this platform, but my brother, the born again Christian. I can't even tell you how many times I was told, well, my atheism is because I have a hole in my heart that I'm trying to fill with like sex and drugs. I'm like, I don't do any of those things, man. So like, what are you, what are you talking about? Or, um, yeah, again, like I'm not trying to be accountable for myself. I'm just trying to do things how I want and not have to, look to God for, his forgiveness and things like that. So, yeah, it was more so with my stringently Christian, excuse me, brother, who tried to call me out of my BS, trying to like just serve myself and do things in this life that are going to prevent me from being with God because I'm trying to fulfill the pleasures of the flesh,
Hmm.
in present times, if you will. So I was like, look, I guarantee you that our lives aren't very much different. You have a daughter, I have a son. I go to work, I come home, I hang out with my son, I go to sleep, and I repeat that process. You do that same thing. The only difference between the two of us is you thank God that you woke up that day. And
Right.
so, I mean, there's nothing I'm doing in my life that is any different than what you're doing. But for you to tell me that I am letting go of God because I want to be a sinful person is just, it's nonsensical to me.
I kind of feel like that's the most common characteristic of a person who leaves the faith. But I think they forget that most people still in the faith are doing all the same sins that they're
Yeah.
claiming atheists are doing. You don't
Oh,
have to leave the
yeah.
faith to commit sins.
Yeah, sure. Or you could just find a denomination that accepts your sins.
Yeah, exactly. That
Yeah.
happens all the time.
Oh, yeah.
Were there attempts to bring you back into the faith?
Oh, to this day. Yeah,
They're
sure
still
thing.
okay, still doing
Yeah,
it.
no, still. Um, like, I'm not anti-theist. I'm an atheist. So
Hmm. Hmm.
my son, when he was born, I don't even want to say pressured, but I was told he needs to be baptized
Right.
because his mother and grandparents were all Catholic, and I had no problem with that.
Yeah.
By all means, no harm, no foul. It only becomes an issue when you start telling my son that he's a sinner and a bad person. But that hasn't happened yet. But so I'm still pressured in being told that, well, now your son's mother, his grandparents, your father were all believers and Catholic. So you rejecting God, you're going to be the one person who's not reunited with all these family members with your son in the afterlife. I'm like, oh, don't use my son against me, man.
Right. Are there any aspects about being in the faith that you miss? For example, a lot of people miss the social aspect. They miss going to church and seeing their friends and going to potlucks and barbecues.
Sure. Um, no, because I guess growing up, our faith system, if you will, was seriously, it was this 1 hour on Sundays type thing. We didn't do any extracurricular sort of
Okay.
activity. Uh, and as Catholic as my parents were, they still were like, all right, let's get this mass over with and get home.
That is a very Catholic thing though.
Well, if you haven't been
Yeah.
to a Ukrainian Catholic mass, there's still probably one going on. So
Yeah.
so
I
yeah, there
do
wasn't any
remember
really. Yeah.
so I do remember the same experience in the Catholic Church growing up, just thinking like we're only going for an hour, maybe even 45 minutes. We're going to get in,
Yep.
we're going to get out, get the kickoff afterwards. We'll get home by 12.
Yeah. Yeah. Get home by 12. Oh man, that was the middle of the ceremony.
Are there people at this stage that you've chosen not to tell about your deconversion?
No,
Okay.
no. Uh, when I was first really questioning back in the 2008 2009 time frame. I was hesitant about telling my mom, more
Hmm.
so because I knew that her mom, my grandma, a very Russian Orthodox, person. I guess it would be equivalent to somebody coming out to Christian parents. But when I told my mom, I was like, I don't think I believe in God anymore. She was like, you mind telling me why? And we talked about it, and I never got any sort of, oh well, I don't love you anymore, or you're not part of this family. She was like, well, that makes sense. So when I asked her, why do you believe? And her honest answer was, well, that's what I was taught to believe.
Right.
I think that's why she was more accepting of my questioning, because she very honestly told me, I don't have a reason to believe. I just believe because that's what I was told to.
Right. Yeah.
So it was a successful coming out, if you will.
I do feel like that is a good description of what most atheists experience when they do come out, because it is difficult and you don't know how people are going to receive you. And
Yeah.
sometimes you don't get received well. It's helpful when those that love you the most don't give you a hard time about it.
Yep.
Um, but I do understand that you're not going to have a perfect coming out. Someone's going to be upset
Oh yeah.
one way or
Oh,
another.
uh, when was it? It was my grandpa's funeral in 2010.
Mhm.
My aunt, my dad's sister, he was like, is Nicholas even going to come to the church, or does he think he's going to burst into flames? I'm like, I'm going to go to the church for my grandpa, man.
Oh man.
Excuse me.
Was there a component of, we'll call it education or science or learning? Was there an educational component, perhaps while you were in school, that led you towards atheism as opposed to towards your faith?
Not specifically in the educational system, but through my university, we were through my metaphysics and epistemology teacher letting us know that Richard Dawkins
Oh
was
yeah.
having a book signing
Yeah.
at Indiana University. And so I went. Oh my God, huge fan. And he said something along the lines of, and of course I can't quote him because he's brilliant.
He is.
Uh, you know, billions of light years of the observable universe, yet God chose to reveal himself to this speck of dirt, which is the earth, in this Middle Eastern area of that speck of dirt in this vast universe, and chose to reveal himself to goat herders who were usually just high and didn't know where the sun went at night.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh shit, you make a good point. So
Could there not have been a more effective way of communicating your existence?
yeah, oh yeah, oh my goodness, if I think about this all the time, if there was a God, and there's so many different denominations and just wars throughout history over different
Hmm.
small aspects of the belief system, couldn't you just like, hey, time out, guys, this is what's up, this is what's really going on, so like all the other BS, just stop it. No, either he can't do it or he doesn't exist.
Right. So, Richard Dawkins, incredibly brilliant.
Oh yes.
Um, do you feel like, as you learn, as you're thinking about what you used to believe and what you believe now, um, have you gone back and read, say, like any of the biblical texts, with like a new perspective now that you're on the other side of it?
I've tried, but just as a human, it is difficult to do so with an
Yes.
unbiased opinion.
Right.
So I'll read some decent passages and be like, okay, I'm trying my best, And then you get to the slavery and genocide. It's like, all right, how do you really try to just justify this type of stuff?
Right. Right.
So it's I just honestly, yeah, if it's a flaw or fault, but I haven't been able to do it with an unbiased mindset,
Right. And I
honestly.
get that. I think one of the first things that popped out at me when I was young and I was still a believer and I tried to read it unbiasedly, it's very difficult to do so, whether
Yeah.
you're believing it or not. But somebody questioned me once because I used to get on like online forums and talk to atheists because I
Yeah.
wanted to know, like, why don't you believe? Because it seems convincing to me. And I, over the course of a couple months, I had a very good friend that I met, and he said the problem is you've started with the conclusion that the Bible is true, and then you make it everybody else's job to prove it wrong. He goes, don't start with that conclusion. Start with the conclusion that it's just as wrong as the Quran or any other text, and now
Uh-huh.
go through it and see, can you prove it right? And
Interesting.
very good point. I couldn't do it. I could not read through the Bible and
Sure.
say, yeah, this would lead me to believe that the God of the universe chose to communicate in this particular method to these particular people and
Yeah.
give this particular set of laws.
Right. You know, I mean, that's it sounds like an interesting method, but yeah, again, myself, I wouldn't be able to do that effectively.
Now you've got a son.
Yes.
I think he's just a little bit younger than my own, and I've given some thought um, about what to do with him when he becomes old enough to have questions of his
Oh,
own.
let me
And
stretch for this one, man.
I know because it sounds easy enough. You just tell them what is true, but it's not that easy because, for example, my twin brother's got three girls, and his second girl, I want to believe it was her. It was a first. Sorry, they decided we're not going to do the Santa Claus thing. We're just going to tell
Okay.
them straight up that there's no Santa Claus, and that's just it. We're not going to do the game. And as soon as she got into school and she got old enough to be in like the first, second grade, and Christmas time came around, she told the entire class that Santa Claus didn't exist. Now they're getting angry text messages. So,
Yeah.
like, is there a time and place to communicate certain things with your son? And when is that time and place?
That I've since the day he was born, even probably before, I've wondered about that and what that day is going to look like. And even with his mother, we've had these talks because she's a believer. She's like, "Well, what are you going to tell Lucas?"
Right.
And I was like, "Well, I'm not going to tell him that what you believe or what grandma and grandpa believe is wrong. I'm just going to tell him what dad believes. And it's just one of many different. Excuse me, I'm about to sneeze, I think.
It's okay. Go ahead. Let it out.
Okay.
I won't say God bless you.
It's all good. Okay, I think it went away. Excuse me. Um, but like I said, if he asked me what's going on, I would just tell him, this is what mommy and grandma and grandpa believe. This is what daddy feels. Uh, None of us are wrong, and none of us are right.
Right.
You have absolutely every ability to look into what you want. What Even though what grandma and grandpa believe, daddy doesn't believe, there are still so many other different sort of belief systems. If you want to look into them, great. If you want to go along with what grandma, grandpa, and mom believe, no problem. If you want to ask dad more questions and not believe, no problem. But as a father, and I'm sure many fathers out there can attest to this. If he comes to me one day and goes, "Daddy, I listened to you and heard your reasons for not believing, but I believe in God, and I want you to go to church with me." You are damn right. I'm going to church with my son and
Mhm.
supporting him,
Right. Of
and,
course.
and that's it.
I think I would come to the same conclusion because even if you didn't believe, you're spending time with your child, you're supporting them as a human
Yes.
being. And I think if you don't support your child because they don't believe the same thing you believe, that's not a sign of love,
Sure.
right?
Oh,
That's essentially abandonment. That's coercion. I'm not going to do a thing that I should be doing because you don't believe the thing I want you to believe.
right. Yeah.
Which happens to a lot of Christians when they leave. How many people have we seen on TikTok
Oh,
that have left and been abandoned by their family?
oh my God. Yeah. So many. Uh, one of the one of my followers, and I follow her as well. Uh, I don't have her permission here to say her name, but
Mm-hmm.
we interact a lot. I'm sure you might know who she is, but as a ex-Mormon,
Yeah.
that's something that happened to her, and I could not effing imagine like abandoning my son because he doesn't believe what I believe.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know that like, ugh,
You
like
actually, as you were mentioning that, it gave me a thought. Now that you're a father, when you read about or hear about the biblical father, is it more difficult to believe that he's a good father now that you are your own father and you've kind of said, well, I think this is what a good father would do, or or is it neutral? For example, it was hard to imagine how I would treat my own child until I had one. But now that I
yeah.
have one, I can tell you I would never do the things to my child that God
Oh,
did to his children in the
oh,
Bible.
I already think I'm a much better father than God.
Yeah.
I mean, to like, I've had discussions with people about like morality and ethics, and as a father, it, I'm God, right? Let's just do the scenario, and you're
Mhm.
Pharaoh. As a father myself, I know how much I love my son. I assume you love your kids. I would not, to prove a point to you, send an angel of mine to murder your kid.
Oh, never.
Just as from one father to another. Like I could not put another father through some sort of grieving process like that. Are you freaking kidding me? Or oh, my other kids are sinners, so I'm going to sacrifice my son to absolve you of these sins. Like, no, I would do absolutely anything and everything to protect and make my son happy. And
Right.
the God of the Bible does not seem like that sort of individual. He uses his creation and kid as leverage to get people to worship him.
Right. And I got to be honest, I would want my child to love me. I would be appalled if my child ever worshiped me.
Yeah,
Um,
I like that. I like that. Yeah.
so I think I only have two more questions left. Um, have you found that being in the atheist camp, especially now that you're like publicly in the atheist camp,
Sure thing.
do you feel like that has placed any limitations on who you're able to socialize with? Are there people who no longer want to socialize with you, or are there people that are awkward around you now that weren't awkward around you before?
They might be secretly, but they haven't expressed that to me publicly.
Okay.
For example, like one of my old sergeants in the military, he's a master mason. So he's part of the masonry group,
Okay.
and I've talked
Like
to
the
him about it.
Freemasons or the
Freemasons,
yeah,
exactly.
okay.
Yes, he's a Freemason, and I asked him like what it would take to get into that because I'm interested in brotherhood and things like that. And he
Mm-hmm.
goes, well, you have to believe in some sort of higher power. And this was when we
Does
were in
Marduk count? The
Afghanistan.
Babylonian deity?
Maybe I looked into it for a little bit. I went through a few meetings, but then I started questioning my beliefs more, and I was like, well, I'm an atheist, so I don't think I could do this. And that my sergeant started following my page.
Mm,
The one who is a Christian, and uses that belief system to justify his brotherhood into the Freemasons. Um, and there was a small part of me, I'm not gonna lie, that was like, I had so much respect for the sergeant because we served together. Maybe I should delete my stuff because I don't want to upset him.
Right.
But he's never commented
Hmm.
on any of my stuff. I don't know if he's watching my videos because he's questioning or just because we served together. I don't know
Hmm.
the reasons for his following my page, but yeah, no, nobody's publicly said anything about not wanting to socialize with me anymore. But people who I've befriended in the past, who I know are believers or have been believers at least, and they follow my page, have not uh, spoken outwardly about like my content.
That's promising.
Yeah.
So I think my last question is looking towards the future. What are some of the things that you're most hopeful for? Like, what are your outlook on life? What brings you joy each day? Because I think in the mind of the believer, atheists have to be miserable and live a meaningless life. But I don't find that to be true.
No, it may be very cliche, but what brings me joy, what I look for in the future is just to, again, it's going to sound cliche, but I just want my son to be happy. I
Hmm.
want to do everything I can to, set him up for success. I don't care about anyone else other than him. So my daily goal, just as a person and father, and every decision I make is to benefit my son. And
Right.
honestly, this page to an extent, because he will be surrounded by faith.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, but I want him to know that if he ever was to question it, and if he came to dad, there would be zero judgment on
Right.
dad's part. And that's another hope I have for just my page. I've had people comment on my TikTok saying, hey, there's other people like me out there. If I talk to any of my friends or family, they're just going to bastardize me. And
Right.
now, but this is a safe place for me to really question my beliefs and talk to someone who's not going to judge me. So so that's my goal. I want to be someone that anyone can talk to about anything. I like to fancy myself as a very non-judgmental person. So if you could come to me with anything, my son could come to me with anything, and I'll help you, guide you through it, and not cast judgment or have any sort of everlasting feelings of negativity towards you.
Right. Yeah. You're not going to wish eternal torment on them for any reason.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Nick, I really appreciate your time. I think we'll probably have more discussions over on TikTok. If you're on TikTok, please follow the Chicago Atheist. If you're not on TikTok, make an account and go follow the Chicago Atheist.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate it.
All right, you get some rest, and I'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good. It's been a pleasure. I look forward to doing this again soon.
Absolutely. Cheers, Nick.